The growl did not begin as sound. It began as pressure, a subsonic pulse that moved through the concrete floor of the military working dog compound at Naval Special Warfare, Little Creek, Virginia, and settled somewhere behind the sternum of anyone standing within 20 feet. By the time it became audible, it had already done its work. The two handlers on early rotation had stopped moving toward Kennel 7 4 days ago. Now they stood at the corridor intersection, clipboards in hand, and completed their notes from there. 6 days. 6 days since the food bowl had been touched. 6 days since the water level dropped only because condensation gathered along the rim and ran down the interior. 6 days since Belgian Malinois working dog Bram, tactical designation. 7-7 Iron Fang program, 103 documented operational deployments across 4 combat theaters, had permitted anyone within arm's reach without incident. 2 handlers had required stitching. 1 had a broken index finger, still taped and still swollen. The duty vet had recommended sedation 3 times. Each time, Staff Sergeant Grant Boyle had entered the corridor with the syringe and exited the corridor without having used it. Not because Bram had charged him. Because Boyle had looked at the dog, at the amber eyes fixed on the far wall of the kennel, at the rigid posture that was not aggression but something older and more specific than aggression, and had put the syringe back in his vest pocket and walked out without speaking. That morning, Major Dennis Birch had signed the order. 48 hours. If the animal did not demonstrate measurable behavioral improvement by 1700 hours the following day, the standing order would be executed. No extensions, no appeals. The compound had a mission to support. Grief, Birch had said in the briefing, was not a protocol. Nobody had responded to that. Chief Petty Officer Cole Ferris, United States Navy SEAL, had been killed by small arms fire in Kunar Province, Afghanistan, 20 days earlier. He was 29 years old. He had been Bram's handler for 3 years. In the operational record, that bond was documented in training logs, deployment rosters, and post-mission assessments. Efficient clinical language designed to capture performance rather than weight. In the kennel corridor on the morning of the 21st day, it was documented differently, in the untouched bowl, in the silence that replaced the familiar morning sounds, in the way Bram had carried himself since the notification came through. Not grief in the way the word usually traveled, something more precise. The recognition that something essential had been removed from the world, and that the world had not adjusted its structure to account for the removal. That was the situation when the woman appeared at the compound gate at 0830. Civilian clothes, a gray windbreaker, dark jeans, a single shoulder bag worn over one side without military adjustment. She handed a document to the gate guard with the unremarkable efficiency of someone familiar with a great deal of paperwork. The guard read it a second time, made a phone call lasting 40 seconds, and opened the gate. The document read, Civilian Contractor, Dog Behavior Rehabilitation, assigned to Little Creek K9 Compound, temporary at the request of Naval Special Warfare Command, no rank, no unit designation. No operational history. Nothing in its language suggested the carrier had ever been anything other than exactly what it described. Staff Sergeant Grant Boyle met her at the corridor entrance. He was a large man. Not cultivated large, but constitutionally so. A man who had always occupied more space than others and had built his professional identity around, using that space purposefully. 12 years running this compound. He knew every animal in it by temperament, training history, and the particular way each one moved when a storm front was building. He had a gift for dogs that he had never needed to claim as a gift. He read the paperwork. He looked at her. He read the paperwork again. She was medium height. Her hair was pulled back without ceremony. The windbreaker was slightly worn at the left cuff. She was looking past him into the corridor, not with curiosity, not with the carefully composed interest of a professional making a first impression. She was looking the way someone looks when they are taking a kind of inventory that does not require annotation. Command sent a civilian dog rehabilitation contractor. Boyle did not inflect it as a question. It was a sentence that contained, in its complete flatness, the total weight of his assessment. Cole Ferris has been gone 20 days. Bram is his dog. They sent you. She didn't answer. She was still looking past him, moving her gaze down the visible portion of the corridor. Slow and sequential. kennel by kennel, reading something in each one that Boyle could not identify until her attention reached the far end, Kennel 7, and stopped there. "I'll need access to the full compound," she said, "including the training corridor and the assessment track." "You'll need considerably more than that," Boyle said. "Before you get within 10 feet of any animal in this facility, I need to know what your qualifications actually are, not what's on a government form. Actually are. The paperwork covers it. The paperwork says dog behavior rehabilitation. My brother-in-law prints official-looking documents for his church bulletins." He folded the document in a way that stopped just short of disrespectful and held it back out to her. "Tell me who you are." She took the document and put it in her bag without looking at it. "I'd like to start with a behavioral record from the past 6 days. Who's been maintaining the documentation?" 12 years, and he had never had someone respond to that particular register of his by simply resuming the conversation as though he had not spoken. He looked at her for a full moment. Then he turned and walked into the corridor at a pace he knew would be difficult for someone unfamiliar with the layout to maintain without hurrying. She kept up without appearing to hurry at all. Before we go any further, if you're new here, this channel exists for one reason: to tell the stories of the men, women, and working dogs who serve in silence. Stories of sacrifice, of loyalty, of bonds that don't break even when everything else does. Bram hasn't eaten in 6 days. And the woman they just dismissed at the gate, she knows something none of them do. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, and drop a comment. Have you ever underestimated someone who turned out to be exactly what the situation needed? Sergeant Kyle Pruitt was leaning against the supply room doorframe with a coffee mug and the particular expression he kept for things he had already categorized. He was lean, quick processing, the kind of man who read a room faster than he read a manual, and used that speed to organize people into predictable slots before they finished introducing themselves. 4 years at this compound, 2 deployed cycles with SEAL Team 2 as an attached K-9 handler. He had known Cole Ferris well enough to keep the man's photograph in his locker. He watched the woman walk past and said, at a volume calculated to carry as far as she was, "She's going to get herself bitten before lunch." Specialist Tina Gallagher, working the equipment cage to his left, made a sound in the same family as a laugh. She was 5 years Pruitt's junior, and had found that aligning her opinions with his was an efficient way to navigate the compound's social topography. At the far end of the corridor, near Kennel 7, the woman stopped. She did not approach the door. She positioned herself approximately 2 meters back, far enough that the motion sensor strip had not activated, and she was still, hands loose at her sides, chin slightly down. She was not looking directly into the kennel. Bram was already watching her. He had been watching from the moment the gate opened. He processed every new element in his environment immediately and completely. But he watched her with something different from how he had watched the handlers who came with syringes, or the officers who stood outside the door and discussed the situation in the manner of people discussing a problem that had a logical solution. He watched her with something that was not yet recognition, but occupied the same space as recognition. Then he put his weight forward and growled. She did not move back. She did not raise her hands, did not attempt any of the recommended de-escalation postures from the visitor protocol binder that sat on the corridor desk. She stood with her weight even and her posture settled, and she looked at a point just below Bram's jawline, not at his eyes, which was significant in a way that most of the people watching from the junction didn't yet have the framework to identify. 3 seconds? 4. The growl maintained itself. Then it dropped half a register. Continuous, but different. The way a pitch changes when what's generating it shifts from one gear to another. Corporal Nate Rivers, 22 years old, 6 months into his assignment, sweeping the far corridor, stopped sweeping and watched. He did not know what he was watching. He only knew it was not the same as everything else that had happened in front of that kennel over the past 6 days. Warrant Officer Reese Dunbar, the compound's senior veterinary technician, had 7 years in this facility and a professional habit of approaching new variables with a folder and a set of pre-established conclusions. He caught up with the woman near the feed station while Boyle was occupied with a call from Birch's office. "Belgian Malinois," Dunbar said, opening his folder. "Operationally deployed working dog, high prey drive, single handler bonded over a 36-month deployment cycle. The cortisol indicators in his behavioral presentation suggest acute complicated grief rather than simple separation distress. His prey drive is not absent, it's suppressed. He's choosing non-response. Standard separation protocols don't apply here. He paused, letting the professional weight of that settle. What protocol are you planning? I'd like to see his full training record first, she said. The deployment packet from his unit, not the kennel system summary. Dunbar blinked. The deployment packet is classified at the unit level. I can provide the kennel documentation. That's fine for now. He handed her the folder. She read it the way people read things they have read many versions of. Not fast, not performing carefulness, but with a specific quality of attention that missed nothing without appearing to search for anything. She turned to the 4th page, stopped, and read a single section twice. Then she closed the folder and returned it. His reward response history, she said. He shows negative conditioning to treat-based reinforcement during high-stress scenarios. Dunbar held very still. That's correct. Cole Ferris used an alternate reinforcement structure for stress-adjacent training contexts. It is not documented in the public access kennel file. I know, she said. She looked back toward Kennel 7. Dunbar did not move for a moment. Then he wrote something in the margin of his folder and capped the pen carefully, the way a man caps a pen when his hands need a task while his mind works on something else. Near the feeding station, Gallagher was already positioned when the woman arrived. She offered the daily schedule with efficient helpfulness. Bram's on a twice-daily cycle, she said. 700 and 1700. Preferred reinforcer is the dry lamb-based formula. High-protein wet food overstimulates his system, makes him hard to manage. The woman read the schedule, looked at the storage bins, selected the high-protein wet food. Gallagher's expression shifted from cooperative to something quieter and more calculating. I just said, thank you, the woman said, and carried the food to the prep station. Gallagher watched her go. The expected outcome of that particular exchange had not materialized, and she was reassessing. From the corner of the prep area, Sergeant First Class Emma Dietrich observed. 18 years as a handler, the kind of institutional permanence that a facility organizes itself around without noticing. She had not formed a spoken opinion about the contractor yet. What she had done was watch her hands, the way they moved over equipment she was theoretically encountering for the first time, the absence of any exploratory hesitation, the calibrated pressure on buckles, the automatic orientation toward the correct side of each piece of equipment. There was nothing about those hands that looked like first contact. Major Birch arrived in the main corridor at 10:45 without forming an official assembly because he preferred that his authority operate through presence rather than ceremony. The handlers arranged themselves into attentiveness, which accomplished the same result. He did not look at the contractor when he spoke. Evaluation parameters are unchanged, he said. 1,700 hours tomorrow. No measurable improvement in intake behavior and handler responsiveness. The standing order proceeds. No extensions. He let that sit for 3 seconds. Understood. He left. The corridor rearranged itself into a different kind of quiet, the kind that follows the statement of a deadline that everyone present already knew, but now officially cannot pretend not to know. The woman walked back to the kennel corridor. She set her shoulder bag against the far wall, 3 meters from Kennel 7. She sat down on the floor, not crouched, not perching. Saturday, back straight, legs crossed, the particular posture of someone who has made themselves comfortable in far more difficult positions and knows exactly how long they can maintain this one. It was such a complete departure from every approach that had been attempted in 6 days that Rivers, sweeping 20 meters down the corridor, stopped and stared with his mouth slightly open. Bram came to the kennel door and stood there. The growl did not resume. He stood with his weight forward, amber eyes on her, and he was entirely silent. Not in the absence of sound, but in the deliberate way. He was reading her the way a highly trained working animal reads every unfamiliar variable, completely, without judgment until processing is complete. She did not speak. She did not make eye contact. She looked at the middle distance between them and breathed evenly. At the 23rd minute, Bram turned away from the door and lay down on his sleeping mat, not facing away from her, not fully toward her, at an angle, front paws extended, head resting on them, eyes open. It was not submission. It was not trust. It was a decision that was different from the decision he had made every prior morning, and the handlers watching from the corridor junction felt the difference in their bodies before they could articulate it in words. Rivers went back to sweeping. Slowly. Pruitt appeared at the junction. He looked at Bram on his mat. He looked at the woman sitting on the floor against the wall. He said, at his carrying volume, "Cole spent 3 years building what that dog understood about trust. 3 years. And they send someone without a rank, without a record, without anything, to fix it in 48 hours. He paused. Cole would have had a great deal to say about that. The woman's hands were resting on her knees. For a moment, so briefly that Rivers, still watching, was not certain he had actually seen it, her right hand closed into a brief fist and released. Once. Then her posture returned to exactly what it had been. In the afternoon, she asked to enter the training yard with Bram alone. Boyle said no, directly, without qualifications. "Let her try," Dietrich said, not as an argument, as a fact being introduced into a calculation. "If she sustains an injury, that's her assessed risk. She knows the animal's current state." Boyle looked at Dietrich for a long moment. In 18 years, Dietrich had been wrong about a dog twice. He kept that number. 2 handlers outside the fence. Control equipment ready. If I say pull, we pull. The yard was concrete, approximately 15 meters by 12, bordered on 3 sides by chain link and on the 4th by the kennel wall. The late afternoon light came in flat and gray from the overcast, the kind of light that makes distances harder to read than they should be. Bram came out of Kennel 7 slowly, with the controlled deliberateness of a dog carrying something invisible and heavy. He saw the yard. He saw the handlers positioned at the fence. He saw Boyle. Then he saw her, standing in the center of the yard, arms at her sides, not looking at him directly. The handlers at the fence went completely still. Bram took 3 steps toward her and stopped. His posture was not aggressive in the clinical taxonomy, ears forward rather than pinned, hackles slightly elevated but not fully risen, weight distributed rather than loaded. He was reading her. She extended her left hand, not toward him, but forward and angled down at approximately 30 degrees from her body. Her first 2 fingers together and slightly separated from the last 2. Thumb closed. It was a hand signal, not the standard command position hold, not the approach and engage variant, something else entirely. Dunbar, watching from the fence, began searching his field manual database on his tablet immediately. He found nothing. Bram stopped moving, his head lowered slightly, his ears rotated. Forward, backward, forward, the particular bilateral scanning motion of an animal processing simultaneous auditory and visual input. Then he sat, not in the formal command position, a voluntary sit, weight shifted back, haunches settled, and the quality of threat that had characterized everything about him for 6 days was simply absent, not suppressed, absent. At the fence, Pruitt turned to Boyle. "Where did that signal come from?" Boyle didn't answer because he had no answer to give. She moved to Bram's left side, his left, which Boyle registered with the part of his attention that cataloged precise details, and crouched beside him without hovering over him. She reached out and began unlatching the harness. Every handler simultaneously tightened. An animal in this behavioral state, having a harness removed, which represented structure and operational identity and everything it understood about its role, was not a safe action. Boyle took a half step forward. Bram held his position. She worked the buckles with the fluency of someone who has performed this action so many thousands of times that the specific harness configuration presents no informational content. Her hands simply moved and the buckles opened. When the harness came free, she held it in both hands and examined the interior panel, pressing along the perpendicular seam in the chest section. Her thumbs found something there, held it for 2 seconds, then folded the panel closed and sat with the harness in her lap without moving. Dietrich was the only person close enough to see what the panel had contained before she closed it. A piece of fabric, small, dark navy, and deep gold, pressed flat and hidden in the lining. Not kennel colors, not any compound designation Dietrich recognized. She refitted the harness onto Bram with the same efficiency, latched each buckle, and stood. Bram stood with her. Pruitt watched this from the fence and said nothing for the first time all day. Es were. Before we go further, If this story is landing with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. A veteran, a handler, anyone who's ever been told they don't belong in a room they have earned. Mara just made Bram sit voluntarily for the first time in 6 days. And Boyle's expression right now? Subscribe, share, and keep watching. Because we are just reaching the part where everything changes. In the debriefing that was not formally a debriefing but served the same function, handlers at the corridor junction, assessments exchanged in the register of people processing something they didn't yet have the right category for, Pruitt asked the question directly. Where did you learn that signal? She was completing the daily behavioral assessment form at the wall-mounted clipboard. Proprietary, she said. Proprietary? He repeated it with a specific weight of skepticism. You're listed as a civilian contractor. What does proprietary mean in that context? It means the answer isn't available in this corridor. He stepped into the proximate distance of a conversation that has changed register. Not physically aggressive, but into the interpersonal territory that communicates that pleasantries have concluded. Cole Ferris trained that dog for 3 years. I deployed with Cole twice. I know what his training methodology looked like. The signal you used in that yard does not appear in any documented program. Not SEAL Team Standard, not Force Recon, not any curriculum available to the field. He paused. Either you produce that from nothing, which would make today a statistical anomaly, or you learned it somewhere that does not officially exist. She put the clipboard back on the mount. She looked at him with an expression that contained its own answer. Not because it revealed anything, but because it was the expression of someone who has heard a very precise question and is choosing, with full awareness of the choice, not to answer it. Pruitt felt the ground of his certainty develop a texture it had not had 30 seconds ago. I ran her name, Gallagher said from behind him. Mara Dowd. 3 civilian shelter positions in Virginia over 4 years. Standard background, nothing classified, nothing military. She let it sit. Command sent us a shelter worker to rehabilitate a Tier 1 working dog. Rivers, from further down the corridor, said quietly, 3 shelters in 4 years. He wasn't addressing anyone specifically, just the number in the air. Nobody answered him. At 1700 hours, Mara prepared Bram's feeding attempt. Dunbar was watching, professionally and increasingly personally, in a way that was beginning to concern him about his own objectivity. She selected the high-protein wet food again, combined it with 2 specific supplements from the station in an order and proportion that did not appear in any posted protocol, heated the mixture to precisely the point where the steam began to thin, and added a small measured amount from a personal container in her bag that she did not label or explain. Hess, Doc Pauline Hess, the compound's quieter vet tech, who had learned early that her value lay in watching what others talked over, leaned close to Dunbar and said, nearly without sound, that preparation, the supplement sequence, the temperature staging, that's a modified Protocol 7 Alpha. Dunbar looked at her. I saw it once, Hess said, in an unpublished research draft from the Tier 1 K9 program. 2018. It was never distributed. The program was classified before finalization. Dunbar walked to the prep station. Protocol 7 Alpha, he said. Where did you learn it? She was already carrying the bowl toward the corridor. She said over her shoulder, from the person who wrote it. Dunbar remained at the prep station. He opened the internal research database on his tablet and searched the term. One result, fully redacted, behind an access classification that read, SOCOM Tier 1, authorization required. He stared at the access classification for a considerable time. In the corridor, Mara set the bowl inside the kennel run, stepped back 2 meters, and sat on the floor. Bram came forward. He stopped at 30 centimeters from the bowl and lowered his head. The full, extended olfactory assessment of an animal processing something both complex and familiar simultaneously. He lifted his head and looked at her. She did not move. She used no signal. He looked at the bowl. Then he took 1 step back and lay down facing away from it. In the viewing corridor, Pruitt exhaled slowly. Rivers looked at the floor. Mara sat for 41 minutes. Then she retrieved the bowl, documented the attempt in the log. Duration of approach, 41 seconds. Physical engagement, olfactory only. Proximity sustained, 41 seconds. Anne went to the supply closet off the main corridor. No one saw the phone she removed from the inner pocket of her windbreaker. No one saw the single encrypted message she composed. One line to a contact, with no name attached. 6 hours. Need confirmation. No one saw the phone go back in the pocket before she emerged carrying a spare blanket from the supply shelf, which she brought to the corridor outside Kennel 7 and laid on the floor. She sat on it, crossed her legs, and closed her eyes. "She's going to sleep in the corridor?" Gallagher said. Rivers was still watching her. "I think," he said, not entirely to Gallagher, "she's done this before." Morning came to the compound at 0540 in the form of gray light through the high windows, and the specific combination of coffee from the break room and industrial disinfectant that was the facility's permanent ambient condition. Mara was awake, or had never been fully asleep in the observable sense, her posture against the corridor wall the controlled rest of someone who maintained a baseline of readiness that didn't fully release even horizontally. Bram was standing at the kennel door, not growling, looking at her, not at the corridor, not at the compound entrance, at her specifically. Boyle arrived at 0630 and took in the blanket on the floor, the behavioral log filled in for the 4 a.m. check in handwriting that was steady rather than fatigue-blurred, and the dog standing at the door with a quality of focus that he had not seen since before the notification came through. He could not make those 3 data points form a comfortable picture, and he found that more troubling than the simple contempt he had managed yesterday. "You were here all night," he said. "Evaluation clock," she said. 48 hours. "That's not in the contractor agreement." "No," she agreed. He stood there for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he walked to his office without another word. And the thing he felt that he would not have admitted feeling was not respect, not yet, but something adjacent to it that he had no easy way to dismiss. Master Chief Wade Kimura arrived at 0815 in civilian clothes, which was the kind of deviation that at this compound meant something specific. Kimura was 23 years of service and the kind of institutional gravity that does not announce itself. It simply exists, and the space around it reorganizes. He had no assigned role at Little Creek Kennel. He did not come here as a matter of course. He signed the visitor log and moved through the main corridor with the unhurried certainty of someone who knows exactly where he is going and has no requirement to explain it. He stopped when he saw Mara. She was at the kennel corridor entrance, back to him, speaking quietly to Bram. Not commands, not the functional register of handler communication, but the kind of low, continuous conversation that people have with animals when they believe no one is observing, the kind that carries emotional rather than operational content. Bram was at the kennel door, both ears forward, his full attention on her. Kimura stood there for 4 seconds. Then he turned and walked out of the compound, pulling his phone from his jacket before he had cleared the gate. Pruitt, watching from the break room doorway, found Boyle shortly after. "Kimura was just here," he said. "I know." He looked at her and left without speaking to anyone. Boyle was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said again, and the 2 words carried a weight that suggested he was not indifferent to what that particular observation implied. By mid-morning, Gallagher had navigated the access panel for the secondary training track, the enclosed assessment corridor needed for the afternoon evaluation sequence that Birch had added to the timeline. She input an incorrect code variant twice in deliberate sequence, flagging the lock for manual reset, a process that would typically consume 3 to 4 hours. Dietrich found the locked-out panel inside 15 minutes. She found Gallagher in the equipment cage and looked at her with the steady, unreadable patience of someone who had been in this environment long enough to know the difference between a system error and a decision. "Secondary track is locked out," Dietrich said. "System error," Gallagher said. "Must be." Dietrich's voice did not change. "Tina, whatever you're doing, stop doing it." Gallagher held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then she looked elsewhere. Dietrich went to the security office and ran the manual override herself. 17 minutes, because she knew the sequence and did not wait for the technician. When she returned to the equipment staging area, Mara was already there, laying out the items needed for the assessment. "Track corridor will be clear by 1400, Dietrich said. Mara looked at her. "Thank you." There was a specific weight behind the 2 words, the acknowledgement of someone who understands that they have been helped at some cost to the helper. Dietrich started to leave. Then she stopped, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Not private, but different in register from her professional one. "The signal you used in the yard yesterday, 2 fingers, separated, thumb closed." She was looking at the far wall. Cole used to reference a signal system from a classified program. He never described the specifics, but when he talked about it, it was the way people talk about something that changed how they understood a fundamental thing. She paused. He was proud of it, specifically proud. The way people are about something they were a part of building. Now she looked at Mara directly. He talked about the program architect, not by name. He said once that the person who designed the system had forgotten more about working dogs than most people would ever know. He said it with a kind of respect that men like Cole don't produce easily or often. The staging area held its quiet. Mara picked up the assessment harness and checked the buckle with her thumbs. Steady, automatic. Her face did not change. She did not confirm or deny anything that Dietrich had said. 1400 is fine, she said. I'll be ready. The compound settled into a different quality of attention at 1400. The morning's operational requirements had been discharged. The handlers not actively assigned had moved, without apparent coordination, toward the secondary track area. The 12-member orientation cohort had arranged themselves along the viewing corridor in a manner that looked incidental, but was not. Boyle stood at the track entrance with a stopwatch he was not yet running. Mara brought Bram from Kennel 7 on a long lead. She walked him through the equipment check without commentary. Bram moved beside her, not in the formal partner position of a working dog in operational mode, but in the proximal way of an animal that has made a considered decision about where it intends to be. His ears were active. His tail carried a neutral position. His stride was contained without being suppressed. Pruitt, at the viewing corridor, found the sentence he had been preparing dissolve before he could speak it. At 1420, she released the lead entirely. Bram stood free at the track entrance for 2 seconds. Then she produced a sound, not a word, not a recognized command in any language present in the compound's training archives, but a short, low 2-note vocalization that fell in a specific interval. She followed it with the 2-finger signal, modified, the fingers closing slightly inward rather than separating. Bram moved. He moved through the apprehension approach at operational speed, the ground-covering gait that consumes distance without advertising it, and transitioned into the tracking posture at the perimeter markers with the smoothness of a mechanism designed for that specific transition. He held position at the target dummy with the snap and hold of an animal that does not question the instruction, and then released into the flank cover positioning, and then into the re-engagement cycle. Each phase completed, and the next began without interruption. No hesitation marks between sequences. No anticipatory behavior that would indicate uncertainty about what came next. The handlers watching had seen high-performance working dog assessments many times over many years. They had not seen this. This was not performance in the demonstrative sense. It was not an animal showing what it had been taught. It was communication. Bidirectional, between an animal and a person who shared a language that neither of them had acquired from any standard curriculum. Dunbar had stopped recording. He was watching with the full attention of someone who has run out of framework for what they are seeing and is having to build a new one in real time. Rivers had his arms at his sides. The sequence concluded. Bram returned to Mara's left side, sat, and looked up at her. She did not reach for a treat. She placed her left hand flat on the top of his head and held it there, with the weight of genuine contact, for 3 seconds. Then she looked up. The viewing corridor was silent. Pruitt's mouth had come slightly open. He closed it. Boyle became aware that he had never started the stopwatch. He put it in his pocket. Gallagher stood 3 people to Pruitt's left and said nothing at all. A first for her. That transition pattern. Pruitt's voice had lost its organizing volume. It was the voice of someone working through the implications of what they have just seen, stripped of the performance register. Between the hold and the flank cover. That is not standard K9 operational curriculum. It is not any sequence I have seen in a field manual or a unit SOP or a training program review. He looked at Boyle. That's an Iron Fang sequence. Boyle turned to him. Say that again. 2021. A briefing was called and pulled 2 minutes in. The readout that was showing when the materials were collected, I saw it for 90 seconds before the screen went down. It was a transition protocol for a Tier 1 K9 program. Iron Fang. Pruitt's jaw was tight, his voice controlled. I remember it specifically because of how it was built. It was not a field adaptation of existing curriculum. It was an original design. Someone had constructed an entire communication architecture from foundational principles. He paused. That is the same sequence she just ran. Boyle was very still. She is not a civilian contractor, Pruitt said. It was not a declaration so much as a conclusion forming under pressure. Or she is not only that. She knows an Iron Fang transition sequence. She knows Protocol 7 Alpha. She knows operational details about this dog that are not in any record any of us can access. He exhaled. A journalist would not know that. Intelligence without canine background would not know that. Whoever she is, the category I have for her, does not fit what I am watching. Boyle was already moving toward her. He walked with the stride of a man who has made a decision and is executing it, past the viewing corridor, through the track entrance, toward the woman who was walking Bram back toward the kennel building with the unhurried pace of someone who knew where she was going and was not in a hurry to be stopped. Behind him, the compound held its breath. Boyle reached her at the kennel building entrance. He had covered the distance from the track with the purposefulness of a man whose patience with ambiguity had exhausted itself, and when he arrived, he positioned himself directly in her path, in a way that could not be interpreted as anything other than deliberate. Bram, on the long lead beside her, registered the approach and the quality of the body language attached to it. His ears went forward. The growl that began was different from the one he had used for 6 days, lower, more specific in its direction. "I need to see your complete documentation," Boyle said. "Not the contractor form, everything, whatever is in that bag. The contractor form is the current operational document." She did not stop walking. He stepped into her path directly. "That's not an option, not anymore." His hand went to her shoulder bag, not grabbing, not yet, but the contact of a man asserting a prerogative he believed was his. "I need to know who you are." "Sergeant," she said, and the register of her voice had changed completely from anything he had heard from her in 24 hours. Not raised, not strained, but with a weight that was structural rather than emotional. "Step back! Identification, now. I have 12 years of authority in this compound, and I will use every piece of it." He reached for the bag with his second hand. The strap caught. The shoulder bag pulled against the windbreaker. The windbreaker moved. It happened in the space between 1 second and the next, the left strap catching, the zipper pulling. The windbreaker dragged off her right shoulder and down her right arm far enough that the sleeve of the shirt beneath it was visible from collar to elbow. On the inside of her right forearm, beginning at the wrist and ending mid-arm, ink. Navy blue, applied with the precision of a professional military tattoo artist who understood that the design was not decorative. A knife, not a Bowie, not a combat knife in the generic sense, but a blade with a specific double fuller configuration and a 7-degree recurve at the tip that would mean nothing to most people and would mean one specific thing to the people who needed to recognize it. Bisecting the blade from base to point, a raptor wing spread full, 8 primary feathers, each individually rendered, anatomically precise. Above the crossguard, 3 stars arranged in a tight equilateral triangle, each 5-pointed, each the size of a thumbnail. The entire composition was approximately 8 centimeters long and had been placed where a handler wears a watch, the inside of the wrist where blood runs closest to the surface, and where, in the field, a glance down is never suspicious. Boyle's hands released the bag strap. He had not planned to release it. His hands made that decision independently of any conscious directive, which was information about what they recognized before the rest of him caught up. 3 seconds of silence in the kennel building entrance. The kind of silence that is not the absence of sound, but the active replacement of all prior sound by one specific moment. Nate Rivers was 20 meters down the corridor, turning from the water station with a cup in his hand. He saw what was on her arm. He saw Boyle's hands release the strap. He saw the quality of stillness that followed. The cup remained in his hand, but he stopped moving entirely. Bram, on the lead beside her, took 3 steps forward, not toward Boyle, not away. He moved to her left side, her left, which was a specific position, and sat. His haunches settled fully. His tail moved once, a single slow lateral sweep, and stopped. Then he placed his muzzle against the outside of her left thigh and held it there, and the growl that had been building since Boyle's approach dissolved as completely as if it had never existed. The dog that had not permitted contact in 6 days. The dog that had broken a handler's finger on the 4th day. He sat with his muzzle against her leg and breathed evenly, and the amber eyes were fully closed. Down the corridor, the viewing group from the assessment track had followed at a lag. Handlers from the orientation cohort, Pruitt, Gallagher, Dunbar, Hess, and they arrived at the junction in time to see the aftermath of whatever had just happened in the kennel entrance. Pruitt took in the scene, Boyle with his hands at his sides, the bag strap still swaying slightly, the woman with one sleeve displaced, Bram in the at-heel, sit position with every visible stress indicator absent. Then he saw the tattoo. "That's the patch," he said. He heard his own voice say it before he had consciously formed the sentence. "The Iron Fang patch. That is the exact configuration from the 2021 briefing." Nobody responded. Gallagher, who had spent 24 hours assembling efficient certainties about what Mara Dowd was and was not, looked at the arm and said nothing. There was no architecture for what was in front of her that could support the weight she was currently attempting to put on it. Dunbar was looking at his tablet. He had pulled up the internal classified index and run the sequence image from the briefing description Pruitt had offered, cross-referenced with the design elements currently visible on the woman's arm. The result field was displaying 3 words in the access response: SOCOM Tire 1. Below that, a clearance level he had not seen the inside of in 7 years of government work. Hess put her hand on Dunbar's arm, not to stop him, simply because she needed an anchor point. Gallagher pulled out her own phone and ran the name again, Mara Dowd, through the personnel database, the contractor registry, and the public access special operations support roster. 3 results came back. The most recent listing showed a dog training certification from a civilian humane society in Norfolk. She stared at the listing. The listing stared back. "That's not who she is," Gallagher said, very quietly, to no one in particular. "No," Rivers said. He had still not moved from his position at the water station. "I don't think it is." In the kennel entrance, the woman, Mara, whose name clearly was not the entirety of what she was, had settled the windbreaker back onto her shoulder without apparent hurry. She reached down with her left hand and rested it on Bram's head for a moment. Then she straightened and looked at Boyle. Boyle was a large man who had, in 12 years, become accustomed to being the most certain person in any given situation in this compound. Certainty was not a posture for him. It was the actual product of 12 years of accumulated knowledge in a highly specific field. What he was experiencing at this moment was not the absence of certainty, but its active overwrite, and his nervous system was processing that with the same machinery it used for threat response, because the two felt physiologically similar. "Who are you?" he said. It was not a question the way his previous questions had been questions. It was a request, stripped of performance. "I am the appropriate person for this assignment," she said, "which is what the form says." She paused. "Sergeant Boyle, step back." This time, he did. Lieutenant Colonel James Wren arrived at the compound gate at 14:53. He had been at the perimeter since 14:30, which was 7 minutes after the encrypted message from the inner windbreaker pocket had reached its destination, and 13 minutes before the assessment sequence concluded. He had signed the visitor log without unnecessary conversation and moved through the outer gate with the economy of a man who has visited a great many facilities in an operational capacity and does not allow the architecture to impose a pace on him. He was not tall, was not physically marked by the obvious indicators of long field service, and wore nothing on his person, civilian clothes, a watch, a ring on his right hand, that communicated rank. But the way he moved through the corridor had its own syntax, and the handlers who encountered it made room without being asked to, which was information about the communication channel that posture and gait operate on when language is unavailable. He found the cluster at the kennel building entrance by following the quality of silence. It was the specific silence of a group of people who are processing something they have not yet organized into words, and it has its own acoustic signature. He walked through the group, past Pruitt, past Dunbar, past Gallagher, past Rivers. Without acknowledgement, not dismissive, but absent the social requirement to register each person. The way a man walks through a room that contains furniture he needs to get past, rather than people he needs to address. He stopped when he reached her. He looked at Bram, sitting against her left leg with the muzzle still touching the fabric of her jeans. He looked at the dog for 3 full seconds. the look of someone reviewing the conclusion of a very long calculation. Then he straightened, his feet came together. His right hand rose, fingers pressed together, palm out and angled correctly, to the correct point beside the right eyebrow, and he held the salute with the stillness of someone who has performed this action 1,000 times and understands that, when it matters, stillness is the form through which meaning travels. "Chief Warrant Officer Voss," he said. The corridor made no sound. Grant Boyle, who had 12 years of institutional knowledge about this compound and had built his professional identity on knowing everything that moved through it, Grant Boyle heard that name and looked at the woman he had been calling Mara Dowd and experienced the full reconfiguration of 24 hours of certainty at a speed that was almost physical. Pruitt's hand went to the frame of the viewing window, not to brace, to make contact with something stationary. Rivers sat down on the floor of the corridor. He did not appear to decide to do this. His knees simply resolved the question of whether to continue standing. Gallagher looked at her phone. The Mara Dowd contractor listing was still on the screen. She turned the phone over and put it in her pocket. Riley Voss, CWO, Riley Spector. Voss returned the salute with the crisp completion of someone for whom the gesture is a language rather than a performance. Then she lowered her hand and said, with the ease of a person resuming a conversation, briefly interrupted, "Colonel, the document request." Wren produced a folder from the interior of his jacket and held it out toward Major Birch, who had materialized at the edge of the group from the direction of his office with the expression of a man who had been listening to a developing situation through a wall and has concluded that the wall is no longer an adequate information management strategy. Birch took the folder and opened it. One page. A security classification marking at the top, in bold, secret. Below it, a name, a rank, and a 6-line institutional designation. He read the 6 lines twice. Then he read them a third time with the specific concentration of someone trying to find a reading that produces a different outcome. There was none. He closed the folder, placed it on the corridor's document shelf beside him, set both hands flat on either side of it. "Program architect," he said quietly, not to anyone specific. "Iron Fang K9 Initiative," Wren said. "Special Operations Command, Tier 1. Operational authority supersedes local command on all matters pertaining to program-associated assets." He said it with the comfortable flatness of someone reading a fact rather than making an argument. Birch looked at the folder. He looked at Riley. He looked at Bram, who had still not moved from his position against her leg. The euthanize order was in the file on his desk. He had signed it that morning in the clear-headed confidence of a man managing an operational problem within the parameters of established protocol. It sat there now with the quality of something he could not unsign, but needed to be a different document than the one it currently was. "I need that order withdrawn," Riley said. "Effective immediately, documented through the chain." "Yes, ma'am," Birch said. The ma'am came out before he had organized it as a conscious choice, which was information about the reorganization that had occurred in the prior 40 seconds. He turned and went back to his office to make the call. The corridor reorganized itself in the way that spaces do after a significant event, not immediately, not with any formal signal, but in the gradual, imprecise way that people separate into the configurations that allow them to process what has happened. Pruitt stood against the wall with his arms crossed, not in the stance of skepticism, but of a man holding himself together while his categories are rebuilt. Dunbar was making notes with the focused intensity of someone who has decided that documentation is the appropriate response to an emotion that does not have a clean outlet. Hess was speaking quietly with Rivers, who was still on the floor, and the conversation had the register of two people who have been present for something that requires witness and are being witnesses to each other. Gallagher did not approach anyone. She stood near the equipment staging area and looked at the correct point in the middle distance where a person looks when they are reviewing a series of decisions they cannot retrieve. Wren took Riley aside into the small conference space off the main corridor, a room with a folding table, 4 chairs, and a whiteboard that still had a food rotation schedule on it from 3 days ago. He closed the door. "SOCOM has reviewed the request," he said. "Cole's last mission has been cleared for continuation. Bram is provisionally reassigned to a new team. New handler selection process, standard protocol, but the initial integration period," he paused. "They want you to run the first 2 weeks." Riley was quiet. Through the narrow window in the door, the corridor was visible. Bram had followed to the door and was sitting on the other side of it, muzzle against the gap at the bottom, breathing steadily. "The first 2 weeks is the hardest part," she said, "which is why they want you for it. And after the 2 weeks, the team continues. You go back to the framework revision." He watched her. "The protocol review that was declined 3 times. It's been approved, full scope, all installations, all SOCOM, K9 units, trauma response after handler loss." She looked at the whiteboard with the food schedule on it. It was written in a handwriting she didn't recognize. Someone's daily task, uncomplicated and specific. 3 days ago, this room had been about the ordinary operations of a facility running correctly, and now it was about something considerably larger. "Cole's mission," she said. "What's the timeline?" 30 days from Bram's clearance for active duty. The team is staged. They're waiting." He paused. Riley. His mission was completed. The objective was secured. The ambush was not a failure of the mission. The ambush was what it was. She nodded. She did not look comforted, which was not what she needed the information to do. She needed it to be accurate, and it was accurate. "I'll need full operational authority for the integration period," she said. "No review board, no daily reporting to Birch's office. My assessment, my timeline." "Agreed." "And Gallagher comes off the active handler roster." Wren said nothing. "She sabotaged the track access yesterday. Dietrich can document the sequence. If she's willing to do that to a working dog in grief to score a point against someone she didn't like, she shouldn't be here." Wren considered this for exactly as long as it warranted. "I'll let Birch run the process. As long as the outcome is correct. It will be." She pulled the door open. Bram stood up immediately and positioned himself against her left side with the automatic ease of long practice. Not the trained-at-heel of a dog working under command, but the proximity of an animal that has decided where it belongs. She looked down at him for a moment. "Good boy?" She said it very quietly, and no one in the corridor heard it except Dietrich, who was near enough and whose hearing still operated at the capacity developed over 18 years of listening for the sounds that mattered in a working dog facility. Every working dog has a handler. Every handler has a story. And some stories are buried so deep in classified files that the only ones who know the truth are the ones who lived it, and the dogs who never forgot. Comment below, what do you think the secret patch means? We read every single one, and don't leave before the ending. There's one more thing you need to see. The afternoon reorganized itself around a different center. Birch emerged from his office at 15:45 and made 4 phone calls in the space of 20 minutes. 2 to SOCOM administrative, as 1 to the installation's legal office. 1 that lasted 11 seconds to an extension that nobody subsequently asked about. When he completed the calls, he sat at his desk for 7 minutes doing nothing in particular, which was the way he processed the integration of new information into existing structures. Then he went to the kennel corridor and stood outside Kennel 7, looking at the water bowl, which had been half emptied in the night, and the food bowl, which had not. Not yet. But the water bowl was half empty. He had been checking both bowls twice daily for 6 days. The water had not moved. He returned to his office and pulled the euthanize order from the active file and moved it to the archive with the annotation, "Withdrawn. Command Authority, CWOD, VOS, SOCOM, Tier 1. Per authorization, filed under separate classification." He typed the annotation with the deliberate keystroke of a man making a record that would outlast the discomfort of the moment. Then he closed the file. In the equipment staging area, Dunbar found Riley checking Bram's harness for the secondary time that day. Not a standard practice, but Dunbar had revised his framework for what standard meant in relation to this particular person. "Protocol 7 Alpha," he said. "If you were willing to walk through the foundational logic, not the classified application, the structural reasoning underneath it, I could integrate the principles into the standard stress-feeding protocol." He paused. "The dogs in this compound would benefit." Riley worked the buckle on the right side of the harness, checked the release, secured it again. "Submit a formal request through Wren. If it clears the review process, I'll give you a 3-day working session." Dunbar had not expected yes. The unexpectedness of it took a moment to process. "I'll have the request submitted by tomorrow morning. I'll expect it." He left. She checked the left buckle, the chest panel, her thumb running along the interior seam where the fabric had been folded and where the patch had lived unnoticed for 3 years and 23 deployments. The patch was back in the harness, in the panel. She had put it back this morning in the first quiet hour before the compound woke. It belonged there. Nate Rivers appeared in the equipment staging entrance with the slightly uncertain posture of someone who has been in a corridor for 6 minutes, deciding whether to come inside. He was 22 and had not yet developed the technique for beginning difficult conversations, which meant he had only the direct version available to him. "I want to apply to the Tier 1 K9 program," he said, "when the selection cycle opens." Riley straightened. She looked at him the way that Dietrich had looked at him the prior afternoon. The actual look, the one that assessed rather than categorized. His hands were steady. His posture was genuine rather than composed. He had been the first to see the tattoo and the first to sit on the floor when his knees needed to, which was information about his relationship, with the truth being more important to him than the performance of stability. "Talk to Sergeant First Class Dietrich," she said. "Tell her I suggested the conversation." Rivers held his composure for exactly 2 seconds. Then he nodded with the precise economy of a man containing a significant response in a small space and left the room. Dietrich was in the supply corridor when he found her. He told her what Riley had said. Dietrich listened with her arms at her sides and her expression neutral in the way it was neutral when she was paying maximum attention. "Fill out the application," she said. "I'll put my name on it." Rivers looked at her. "Don't make me regret it," she said. "Yes, Sergeant," he said, and went to find the form. Pruitt found Riley alone in the corridor at 16:30, between the supply room and the assessment track entrance. He had been planning the conversation since 1500, not the content specifically, but the form, the register, whether the conversation was an apology or an explanation or something that did not have a clean category. He stood in the corridor entrance. She was reviewing the daily behavioral log with her back partially to him. "I said things," he said. "Over the past 24 hours." He stopped. She did not turn around. "I said them to Cole's colleagues, in Cole's facility, about the person who trained Cole's dog." The sentence arranged itself in his mouth with the precision of someone who has been turning an exact phrasing for a long time. "That is going to sit with me." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You ran a competence assessment with the information available to you. That is what you should have done." "I ran a contempt operation," Pruitt said. "There's a difference." A beat of silence in the corridor. "Yes," she said. "There is." She didn't offer the absolution that would have made the conversation easier for him because he hadn't asked for it, and because the appropriate response to accurate self-assessment was not relief, but utility. What he did with the recognition was the relevant outcome. He nodded once, the nod of a man who has received a precise and honest response and is taking its full weight seriously, and left the corridor. At 1700, Riley prepared Bram's second feeding attempt of the day. She used the same preparation sequence as the morning, the supplement combination, the temperature staging, the measured addition from her personal container. The process was deliberate and unhurried. Around her, the compound had settled into its early evening operational rhythm, but the handlers not assigned to active tasks had positioned themselves at non-obvious distances that nonetheless maintained clear sightlines to the kennel corridor. They were not pretending to do other things. They were watching, and they had stopped pretending otherwise. She carried the bowl to Kennel 7. She set it inside the run, withdrew to 2 meters, and sat on the floor with her back against the corridor wall. Not on the blanket. The blanket was folded in the supply room, where she had placed it that morning, on the floor itself. Bram came to the kennel door and stood there, as he had the previous afternoon. His muzzle dropped to the level of the bowl's position. Then he looked at her, then at the bowl. The quality of stillness in the corridor was the same as it had been at 1700 the day before, except that 24 hours had elapsed, and within those hours something had changed that was not documented in any log and was not measurable on any scale in the compound's equipment inventory. He walked to the bowl. He stood over it for 2 seconds, the full olfactory processing, complete and unhurried. Then he lowered his head and ate, not with urgency, not with the consuming speed of an animal that has been starved, with the steady, measured pace of a working dog eating in a secure environment, trusting that the meal was what it was and that the environment would hold. At the corridor junction, Rivers turned away from what he was looking at. Not because it was difficult to watch, because some things are private even in institutional spaces, and what was happening in Kennel 7 at 1712 on that particular Wednesday afternoon had a quality of privacy to it that the corridor needed to honor. Boyle, standing at the junction, did not turn away. He watched until Bram had finished the bowl completely, and then he walked to his office and closed the door, and sat at his desk without turning the light on. The euthanize order was in the archive. The archive was where it belonged. Dietrich found Riley in the corridor outside Kennel 7 an hour later, after the feeding check, after the behavioral documentation, after the compound had completed its transition into the quieter end-of-day operational phase. She was standing with her back to Kennel 7, where Bram was on his mat facing the kennel door, front paws extended, eyes half open. Dietrich was carrying an envelope. It was not a military envelope. It was the kind available at any post exchange. Standard size, white, slightly worn at one corner where it had been folded and unfolded. It had been in Dietrich's locker for 20 days, and she had not opened it because it was not addressed to her. "He left this," Dietrich said, "in the kennel office, the night before he deployed." She held the envelope in both hands, as though its weight was different from its size. "He said, if he didn't come back, to give it to whoever Bram followed. Those words exactly, whoever Bram follows." She held it out. Riley looked at the envelope. At the handwriting on the front, no name, no address, just 2 letters in Cole Ferris's particular tight print. D.V. She took it. The weight of it transferred from Dietrich's hands to hers, and the corridor felt the transfer in the way that spaces feel the movement of something significant between them. "He knew," Riley said. It was not a question. "He knew that if anything happened, you would come." Dietrich's voice held steady in the way that voices hold steady when the person using them is operating very close to the edge of something that would, if permitted, be considerably louder. "He planned for it." Riley held the envelope in both hands. She looked at the 2 letters. The handwriting was the handwriting she had seen on training logs, on performance assessments, on the recommendation form she had signed when she selected him for the program. Tight, deliberate. The handwriting of a man who wrote carefully because he understood that writing was a record. "Thank you," she said. Dietrich nodded and walked back down the corridor without looking back, which was a gift of a specific kind, the gift of privacy delivered in the form of a turned back. Riley folded the envelope once, carefully, and placed it in the interior pocket of her windbreaker. She did not open it in the corridor. She pressed her palm flat against her chest for a moment, feeling the small rectangular resistance of the envelope against her hand, and held it there. Behind her, in Kennel 7, Bram had turned on his mat. He was facing the kennel entrance now. The amber eyes were open fully. She turned and looked at him. He looked back. "We're going to finish it," she said, quietly. "The way you say a true thing when the saying of it is as much for yourself as for anyone else. We're going to finish what he started." Bram's tail swept once across the mat. One slow arc, left to right. Boyle was at the corridor entrance when Riley came through on her way out of the compound at 1900. He was not blocking it. He had stepped to the side, and his posture had a self-aware quality that was different from anything he had carried in the prior 2 days. The manufacturing had been removed from it. He looked at her, and the first attempt at what he had come to say did not become words. He tried again. "Cole talked about the program," Boyle said. "Not the specifics, but the way people talk when they have been part of something that changed their understanding of a thing." He paused. "He talked about Bram's first 8 weeks, the training he went through before he came to us. He said it was the most sophisticated working dog curriculum he had ever seen." He looked at the floor for a moment. "He said the person who designed it had forgotten more about working dogs than most people would ever learn." Riley listened. She let him finish. "He was very proud of that dog," Boyle said. The sentence arrived without ornamentation. Just the fact of it. "I know," Riley said. She looked at him for a moment, and the look was not warm in the produced sense, but it was honest. It acknowledged that a man who had spent 12 years building a real thing could be wrong about one specific thing without the 12 years losing their validity. She walked out. At the gate, the compound was at its evening posture, quieter, lower energy, the sounds of feeding and evening checks replacing the assessment activity of the day. The sky over Little Creek was clear for the first time in 3 days, the kind of late October clarity that makes edges sharp and distances deceptive. Wren was parked outside the gate in a dark green sedan. She got in the passenger side. He did not start the engine immediately. She pulled the envelope from her windbreaker pocket. She turned it over once in her hands, then she opened it. The letter was 2 pages in Cole's tight handwriting. She read both pages from top to bottom, not quickly, not slowly. At the bottom of the second page, she held it for a long time without turning it back over. What she did then, she placed her left hand flat on her sternum. She pressed it there, breathed. Wren said nothing. He was looking through the windshield at the compound gate with the understanding of a man who knows when another person needs the space of a car to be simply a space rather than a conversation. After a while, she folded the letter back into the envelope and put it in her pocket. "Ready?" Wren asked. "Yes," she said. He started the engine. The following morning, 0620, Riley arrived at the compound gate in the same gray windbreaker, the same shoulder bag, the same unremarkable configuration of an ordinary person carrying ordinary equipment. The gate guard recognized her now and opened the gate without requiring the form, which was a small thing, Anne noted. She walked through the main corridor, past Boyle's office. His light was already on, which was early even for him, past the supply room, past the equipment staging. The morning sounds of the compound were the same. The muffled movement of animals in their kennels, the ventilation, the distant echo of the facility's morning operational machinery. She turned into the kennel corridor. Bram was at the door of Kennel 7. Not standing, lying, front paws extended through the bars of the door run, head resting on them. His eyes were open. He was not looking at the corridor. He was looking at the kennel entrance, the direction from which the compound connected to the outside, the direction from which people arrived, the direction from which Cole had arrived every morning for 3 years. He had been lying there for some time, perhaps since first light, perhaps since earlier. When Riley turned into the kennel corridor and he heard her specific footfall on the concrete, not other footfalls, hers specifically, his head came up. His ears rotated forward. His tail began a slow lateral movement against the kennel floor. She stopped 3 feet from the kennel door and crouched to his level. He was looking at her, not at the corridor entrance anymore. "Good morning," she said quietly. Bram stood up. He pressed his muzzle through the bars and rested it against her left hand, which she had extended without thinking, and held it there. His eyes closed. The overnight behavioral log on the corridor shelf read, in Dunbar's handwriting, he had taken the 0200 check, 0210. Subject 8 full water provision, lying position, kennel entrance facing, no vocalization. Behavioral indicators, stable. Recommend, standard morning feeding, no protocol modification. At the bottom, in smaller writing, day 7, first full water intake. Riley took the log off the shelf and read the notation. She wrote 3 words in her own handwriting below Dunbar's. Feed at 0700. She put the log back. At 0700, the compound's secondary population had increased by several people who had no assigned reason to be in the kennel corridor at that hour. Rivers was there because he was always early. Dietrich was there because she was always there. Dunbar was there nominally to observe the morning feeding data for his protocol documentation. Hess was there because Dunbar was there. Pruitt stood at the corridor junction with a coffee mug and the expression of a man who was not going to explain his presence and did not believe anyone was going to ask him to. Even Boyle, who had a standing policy of trusting his staff to execute morning protocol without supervision, was visible at the far junction. Riley prepared the bowl without modification. The standard protocol, no supplements, no additions from the personal container. The preparation took 6 minutes and produced a result that looked exactly like the standard morning feeding that any handler could have produced. She carried it to Kennel 7. She opened the kennel run door and set the bowl inside. She stepped back 1 meter, not 2, 1, and stood. She did not sit. She did not use a signal. She simply stood and looked slightly away from Bram toward the upper middle section of the kennel wall. Bram walked directly to the bowl. He did not stop at 30 centimeters. He did not perform the extended olfactory assessment. He walked to the bowl, as if walking to a bowl was a thing he had been doing every morning, which for 3 years it had been, and he ate with the steady pace of an animal in a secure environment who understands that the meal is what it is and that the environment will hold. At the corridor junction, nobody said anything. The absence of sound was not the paralyzed silence of something unprecedented. It was the held breath of people who are present for a conclusion they have been working toward, and who understand that the right response to a conclusion is to let it land completely before speaking around it. Rivers made a small sound. Not a word, just a sound from the back of his throat, the kind that escapes when something you have been carrying a long time is set down. Pruitt looked at his coffee mug. He did not drink from it. He just looked at it. Boyle, at the far junction, nodded once. To no one in particular, the nod of a man giving something its due. Bram finished the bowl. He looked up at Riley. She held his gaze for 3 seconds, then placed her right hand flat on the top of his head and held it with the particular quality of contact. Not petting, not the functional contact of assessment, but the contact of a person who is connecting with an animal the way you connect with something that carries what words cannot carry. She held it for a breath, 2 breaths. Then she lifted her hand. She picked up the empty bowl and carried it out of the kennel run. Master Chief Kimura arrived at the compound gate at 0900. He was not expected. He was not unexpected. He signed the visitor log and moved into the main corridor and reached the kennel building entrance and stopped there. From that position, through the corridor, he could see Riley at the assessment track entrance, checking Bram's harness before the morning's work. Bram was beside her. Neither of them was performing anything. It was the functional quiet of 2 entities who have known each other a long time and have reduced their interactions to the essentials, which look from the outside like casualness, but are actually the distillation of a great deal of accumulated understanding. Kimura watched for approximately 12 seconds. His expression did not change, but the quality of his stillness changed, from the stillness of observation to the stillness of arrival, the stillness of a man who has been in transit towards something and has now confirmed that the thing is what he understood it to be. He nodded once, then he turned, walked out of the compound, and did not sign the exit log, which was technically a protocol deviation, but which the gate guard, after a moment of deliberation, elected not to pursue. In the main corridor, one of the orientation cohort members, a young specialist 3 days into her assignment, name of Carver, found Dietrich near the supply room. "Master Chief Kimura," she said. "Does he know her? CWO Voss?" Dietrich looked at the corridor in the direction Kimura had exited. "I think," she said, with the careful weighing of a woman who does not offer certainty as a substitute for knowledge, "the more accurate question is, where does he know her from?" She looked at Carver. "And I don't have an answer to that yet." Carver considered this. "But you're going to try to find out." Dietrich looked at her steadily. "One thing at a time," she said. At 1400, Riley was in the kennel administrative office, a small room off the main corridor with a desk, a locked cabinet, and a window that faced the assessment track. She was completing the formal documentation required for Bram's status change. From behavioral hold, pending review, to active, integration protocol initiated. The forms were standard SOCOM, working dog administrative paperwork, 12 pages. Each section designed to be precise and each precision designed to survive bureaucratic review. She filled them with the focused efficiency of someone who has completed this type of documentation many times. The name on the handler assignment field was blank. That would require the separate selection process, the standard vetting, the integration assessment. Her name appeared only in the architect/overseer designation, which was a field most forms did not have. This form had it. Her personal phone, the encrypted model from the inner windbreaker pocket, vibrated once. A message, no sender name, no contact designation. Just the number, listed as an unregistered. She picked it up. The message read, "Package delivered. Check his collar." She put the phone down on the desk. She sat very still. Outside the window, the assessment track was empty in the afternoon light, the concrete pale and specific. She read the message again. 4 words and 4 words. Package delivered. Check his collar. She put the phone back in her pocket and stood. Bram was in Kennel 7. She had returned him after the morning work, scheduled to bring him out again at 15:30. She walked to the kennel corridor. Bram heard her footfall and was at the door before she reached it. She opened the kennel run. He came out to her left side. She crouched beside him and ran her hands along his chest harness, the standard inspection path, each buckle and panel, and then around to the collar. The tactical collar was a standard SOCOM working dog configuration. High durability nylon, reflective thread at the identification stripe, a single metal loop for lead attachment. She had fitted this collar herself. This morning, she had checked it twice. Her thumb ran along the interior seam of the collar band. At the mid-left position, the position a handler's hand would reach naturally during an at-heel walk, she felt a seam that was not standard, a millimeter of raised edge, an irregularity in the industrial stitching that was either a manufacturing variation or something else. She pressed. A small piece of metal, flat, approximately the size of a thumbnail, sealed in the nylon, shifted slightly under the pressure. Not a buckle, not a fastener, a disc of some kind, sealed into the collar itself, flat enough to be invisible to casual inspection and present only to a hand that was specifically looking for it. She did not remove it. She pressed it once with her thumb, held the pressure for 2 seconds, and released. Whatever it was there. It had been placed there by someone who knew Cole's dog's collar configuration well enough to locate the seam where the addition would survive an inspection by anyone who was not looking for it specifically. And whoever had sent the message knew that she had checked the collar, knew the outcome before she reported it. She sat on the kennel floor. Bram settled against her left side, his full weight leaning into her with the trust of an animal that has decided to offer everything it is to a single point of contact. She looked at the ceiling of the kennel corridor, the fluorescent lighting, the utility pipes along the wall, the entirely ordinary infrastructure of a facility doing its entirely ordinary work. Whoever Bram follows. That was what Cole had told Dietrich. Not if something happens, give this to the program architect. Not give this to CWO Voss, whoever Bram follows. Because he had understood that the only way to know who the right person was, in a world where identity and authority could be manipulated by anyone with access to the right forms, was to ask the dog. Because Bram's judgment was not manipulable. Because the dog would know. She pressed her hand to Bram's side and felt his breathing. Steady, deep, the breathing of a working animal, at rest in the company of the correct person. Cole Ferris, she said quietly, to no one, to the corridor, to the fluorescent light, to whatever remains in a space after a person has been in it long enough to leave something behind. You were always 3 steps ahead. Bram's breathing did not change. Dasif. At 1700, the compound ran its second feeding cycle. At 1720, Bram finished his second full bowl in a row. Dunbar documented this with the economic exactness of a professional who understands that accurate records are a form of respect. Day 7, evening, full intake, both cycles. Behavioral indicators, stable. Handler responsiveness, positive. Assessment, standard integration protocol may proceed. Rivers was on the orientation rotation for the evening check. He filled in the 1730 kennel log and wrote, under observations, only this. Bram ate. That was sufficient. It contained what it needed to contain. At 1830, the compound settled toward the end of its operational day. The handlers on assignment completed their final rounds. The office lights came off in sequence. The exterior security lights came on in their place. Riley was at the compound gate when Birch caught up with her. He was carrying a manila folder, not a classified folder, not a SOCOM document, just a standard manila folder containing papers that had the character of things that had been looked at many times and decided against each time and were now finally being carried out of the office into the world. I made a call this afternoon, Birch said, to SOCOM Administrative, the protocol review, the framework revision for K9 trauma response post-handler loss. He held the folder at his side rather than extending it. I added my name to the endorsing signatures, all 3 previous refusals. He paused. The record will reflect that the endorsement was delayed. Yes, she said. That's the accurate description. Also, yes. He extended the folder. She took it. It was lighter than it looked, which was the quality of documents that have been debated for too long. They lose weight in the process. "The dogs," he said. "The ones who lose their handlers. This happens more than the record reflects." He was not excusing anything. He was stating a fact that had been sitting on his desk for a long time and that he had not, until today, known what to do with. "The protocol review will change the numbers." "That's the intention," she said. She walked out the gate. The morning of the 8th day came in a different quality of light. The last warmth of late October, before the cold settled in permanently. The kind of morning that exists briefly and entirely, and then is gone. Riley arrived at the compound at 06:15, earlier than the prior morning, and the gate guard had already updated the access record to recognize her badge without verification. She walked to the kennel corridor. The behavioral log on the shelf outside Kennel 7 read, in Dietrich's handwriting, from the 0400 check, 0410. Subject awake, alert. Lying position, kennel entrance facing. No vocalization. Water intake, full. Behavioral presentation, stable. Additional observation. And here the handwriting changed slightly, the way handwriting changes when someone is composing something carefully rather than documenting. Tail response positive at sound of compound gate opening 0412. Duration, brief. Note made for record. The compound gate at 0412. Riley had not been at the compound at 0412. Bram had heard the gate, some arrival, some sound carried in through the facility's ventilation in the particular frequency that a working dog's hearing translates into approaching presence. And his tail had moved. Riley looked at the log. She looked at Kennel 7, where Bram was now at the door watching her. She thought about what Birch had said. This happens more than the record reflects. She thought about the disc in the collar, still sealed in the nylon, about the message with no sender name, about a man who, at 29 years old, in the 48 hours before deploying to Kunar province, had found time to write 2 pages in careful handwriting, leave an envelope in a kennel office addressed to initials he believed the right person would recognize, brief a handler he trusted with a condition that could only be met by a dog's assessment, and conceal something in a collar at a seam only one person would know to check. She thought, he was preparing for 2 outcomes, not one. He had prepared for the outcome in which he came home. He had prepared equally thoroughly for the outcome in which he did not. That was the kind of person Cole Ferris had been. Not optimistic, not pessimistic. Prepared. She opened the kennel run door. Bram came out. She crouched beside him, ran her hand down his back, not checking equipment this time, just contact, the simple contact of a person acknowledging an animal's physical presence in the world. And he leaned into her hand. "Okay," she said, "let's go to work." He stood. His ears were forward and his tail held a working position. Not high, not low, but the particular carriage of an animal that knows what is being asked of it and has decided to answer. She walked him down the kennel corridor, through the main corridor, past the supply room and the break room, where Pruitt and Rivers were getting coffee, and both of them stepped back slightly. Not out of her way, but in the way people step when they want to give something room that they used to stand in the path of. Past the equipment staging, where Dunbar was organizing the morning assessment materials, and he nodded without stopping what he was doing, which was a different gesture from what it would have been 48 hours ago. Past Boyle's office, where the light was on and the door was open, and Boyle himself was at his desk with coffee and documents and 12 years of institutional knowledge that had yesterday reorganized itself around a more accurate understanding of what some of those 12 years had contained. Out to the assessment track, where the morning light came in flat and clear and made everything sharp-edged and very specific. She unclipped Bram's lead. He stood free at the track entrance and looked at her. She produced the 2-note vocalization, low, short, the specific interval that had been the closing signal for every training session he had experienced before Cole Ferris, and during Cole Ferris's time with him as well, because Cole had learned it and used it and made it his own, as handlers do with the language they are given. Bram sat, straight, weight even, head up. The at-rest position. The position that said, "I am here, I am ready. Tell me what comes next." She looked at him. In the harness, under the lining panel, the small folded patch, navy and gold, the knife and the wing and the 3 stars, was present. It had survived 23 deployments. It would survive whatever came next. On the collar, at the mid-left seam, the disc sealed in nylon waited in the ordinary way that important things wait, not announcing itself, not demanding attention, simply being there until the moment when its being there was the required thing. In her interior pocket, the envelope from Cole Ferris, 2 pages of careful handwriting that contained the kind of things a person writes when they want to make sure that what they understood is understood by the right person in the event that they are no longer available to say it directly. She had read it twice the previous evening. She would read it again when the time was correct. And Bram looked at her from the at-rest position at the track entrance, the amber eyes fully forward, every biological indicator pointing at one specific conclusion. He knew where he was, and he knew who he was with. And he had decided, in the way working animals decide things that no training produces and no paperwork documents, that this was where he was supposed to be. She placed her right hand flat on the top of his head. "Good boy," she said. "Good boy." She held it there for 3 seconds. Then she gave the first working signal of the morning, and Bram moved forward into the assessment track with the ground-covering stride of a dog that has not forgotten what it was built for, and the light came in through the track's eastern opening and caught the edge of the tactical collar and the edge of the harness, and made them briefly, specifically bright before the day's work closed around everything and became what it was meant to be. If this story moved you, share it with someone who carries something that doesn't have a name for it yet. And in the comments, tell us about the bond in your life that held when everything else didn't. We read every single one. Service doesn't seek recognition. But sometimes the ones who were there to see it, they carry the weight of the witness.